My experience with civil rights has been over a number of decades, and I always marvel at the fact that we were able to accomplish some very important things, and we realize now how important they were. Fortunately, we got a chance to be with Martin Luther King himself, and we want to talk about those kind of unusual experiences and opportunities. But I'm a native of Tampa, Florida, so I grew up in a segregated community in Ybor City. It was segregated, but at the same time, there were episodes of integration. And as part of my growing up, Ybor City is called the Latin Quarters of Tampa because we have a lot of Latin Americans there. And we have other ethnic groups as well, like Italians, and we have Jewish people, and they are merchants, and they are part of the school system in that area, and churches and other kinds of establishments. So that multicultural experience helped me to be able to feel a part of a larger, diverse community. And even in my family, my father was born in Key West, Florida, but his father was born in Cuba. And then my great-grandfather was born in Spain, rather, not Spain, but France. And he was moved to Cuba, and he was part of the military there, helping to train the Cuban army when they were in conflict with Spain. So that's where the Spanish part comes in, okay? But anyway, I moved to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania right after the war in 1948, 49. We moved to Philadelphia, and I had a chance to go to a completely integrated school. In fact, my principal was Mr. Rosenbaum. And I had white teachers and black teachers and Hispanic teachers. So that multicultural experience came into full bloom because although the community was integrated in terms of housing and in the larger area of Ybor City, you still had the children going to segregated schools back in the late 40s. But in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, there was this project house, project building where it was right near our school, and we had many different ethnic groups. So I got a chance to go to school now and finish the elementary school with them. And I always had a lot of support there. And Philadelphia gave me this idea of how America was really great. And all of the theme songs and seeing the Statue of Liberty and those kind of things down in Washington, and also the Independence Hall in Philadelphia and William Penn statue. So I had, at that early age, a real concern and a love for the country, because Philadelphia, city of brotherly love, okay? So when I got involved in the movement, it had to do with my love for the country and for all people. And I wanted our country to be, an outstanding example of how people should govern and people should communicate with each other. And I was so excited because my first television I saw was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I said, this is really great because this is going to expose us to the rest of the world. That was my idea of television. I didn't know we were going to have so many commercials. I thought, or cartoons. I was thinking that we'd learn so many different languages, because people from other countries would be speaking to us. And we learned about the geography, and we were becoming a world community. Now, this was in elementary school. I saw this as a world community, and I felt so good about all the different groups involved. So it was a natural thing for me to be involved in the movement. I had confrontations with segregation when I was a kid in Florida. And, for example, my grandmother and I used to run together, so to speak. You know, I was always on her, you might say, dress tail. You know, wherever she went, I was with her. And we used to catch the streetcar, which they call the cable car now, and we had to deposit our coins in the receptacle in the front of the car. Then we had to dismount and go walk on the side in the streets next to the tracks until we got to the rear door of the streetcar. And that's where blacks were allowed to enter. We could not just walk down the aisle, so to speak. We had a special place in the back, and that's where we had to enter, in the back. And my grandmother and I were traveling together one day after we put our coins in there, and we started walking back on the street. And we used to run because sometimes the conductor would take your money and then take off. So we would be left there having paid our money and didn't get a ride. So I used to run, and I would jump on the steps of the trolley, because if you stepped on the steps, the door would stay open. Because the door, you know, would not close until the steps were folded up. So I used to, as a little fella, 7 years old, I used to jump on the steps. So this time we were running, and my grandmother fell, and I had to reach back and try to grab her, and then I was trying to keep the door open for the trolley, and the trolley pulled off. We lost our money. But when I think about that loss, I also have to think about that gain, because simultaneously I said to myself, I felt like a sword had cut me in half as I was trying to stretch my little body. And my grandmother was a pretty heavy woman, so there was no way I could pick her up, even with two hands. So I said to myself, when I get grown, I'm going to do something about this problem. So my motivation for getting involved in the movement was not for grandchildren and their future. It was for the short future that my grandmother would have. So that's why I was anxious. And I couldn't wait to get grown. In fact, I don't remember too much about childhood, okay, because I wanted to get grown. So when I got in college and Nashville, and sit-in started, I was right there with it when I got involved in the workshops with Jim Lawson Jr., John Lewis and Jim Bevel and Diane Nash and all of them, Marion Barry. We all got involved in the sit-ins. So that was a way of doing something about the problem. And since we were focused on that. So my civil rights activity actually, in terms of challenging the system, that's when we really made a difference in terms of challenge for change. On a personal level, I did desegregate the lunch counter at a local restaurant. At 7 years old, I was Mr. Coffee. I used to get up in the morning about 5:30 and go to the merchants on the street adjacent to our street I lived on, and take orders for the merchants who were just preparing their stores to be open. And I was Mr. Coffee. I take the order, then I go to Las Novedades restaurant and fill the order and bring the coffee back. 10 cents for the coffee and 10 cents for me. So I had always a pocket of money, even as a kid going to school in the second grade, if you can imagine. Hard for me to imagine sometimes, 7 years old. But I used to take care of 3 other kids who didn't have lunch money. And every day they depended on me to buy their lunch. And I had the money, so no problem. Their parents didn't have anything. So while I was waiting for my coffee, I used to lean against the lunch counter stool. And then finally I put one hip on the stool, and then eventually I put the rest of my body. And I remember that moment of truth when the person who was preparing the coffee was looking at me through the mirror, and our eyes met, and I didn't move. So you recognize that I was not going to move. And, you know, I wasn't drinking coffee there, because I did drink coffee at 7. But I decided since I was doing business, you know, that's part of respect. You have to demand respect. So we sat there from that day on. He looked out the window to make sure no one was looking, and we continued to, you know, operate from there. So I had been sitting on stools all the time. So that was not new to me. To sit in was a perfect transition for me, okay, coming from the South. I got involved in the sit-ins, and I was absolutely thrilled at the fact that the training that I had in nonviolence that Jim Lawson gave us was a thing that made the difference. Because even though they started off in Greensboro, you know, North Carolina, sitting in, we were actually already being trained, and we were, you might say, practicing how to sit in. It was like testing rather than protesting. We just tested the situation by sitting in, but not being arrested. If they would tell us to move, then we'd thank you and we'd leave. Go back to our church, role play what the scene was before. It's called social drama. And then we would prepare ourselves emotionally to be able to handle the situation. Because sometimes you can sit there and you're very courageous, and then something happens and you lose it. So we had to discipline ourselves. So that's the way we did that. We practiced over and over again, and having people yell at us and scream, you know, in our role play. So we were well prepared, and that's the thing that made all the difference. A period of 3 months, we desegregated the lunch counters downtown Nashville. That was before SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was founded in Shaw University in, Carolina, and Raleigh, North Carolina. And we had already desegregated our lunch counters. In fact, we had desegregated the Greyhound bus station in Nashville before the Freedom Ride started. We desegregated the downtown bus station because they had lunch counters, and they were downtown. And we tried to sit in at all the lunch counters downtown, and that was one of the places. But once they desegregated the lunch counters, how could you have segregated restrooms? And the lunch counters are desegregated. So it just began to flow, you know, even without having to do any hard demonstrating and direct action in the restrooms. They just decided to take down the signs, and we were already desegregated. So I got excited about the fact that this nonviolence approach could be very effective, and how you can put together a total strategy. So you were not simply protesting the inequities or the segregation, but you were changing the system. You had the power to do that by generating enough participation and consistency. So it's not like one day we're going to demonstrate and protest and carry signs. No. This was on a regular basis that we actually had the demonstrations. So they understood that even though we were not served, our numbers continued to increase, because we had about 5 colleges there, 5 black colleges and white colleges all together there. So we had black and white students participating in this sit-ins. They were on our strategy committee. So what happened is that it was a student movement. Because I remember one of our professors at Fisk University, who was a white person, he was a Quaker, a physics professor. He went down and he sat in with us, and we told him, no, this was just for students. So he wanted to support what we were doing, but we wanted him to find a different way to do it. So we used to have sessions over his house at night. His wife was very hospitable and give us nice little dessert and snacks at night while we planned our strategy meetings. So that was really good. But it was student-led and student participation, and we were able to use this strategy that we had learned. One of the important things we learned in our teachings is that you must have an economic factor that you affect. Our economic factors actually were two, or maybe three. The first is that we sat in during the lunch hour, which meant that those stools were occupied. So if they weren't going to serve us, they weren't going to serve anybody. Okay? So that affected their, economy. The next thing is that we got the community to also participate in stopping their patronage. Okay? The whites, for example. There was a group of white women, for example, in Nashville, which was called the Church Women United. Church Women United. And it was a group of white women from different denominations, religious church denominations. And they decided that they were going to support what we were doing. And they refused to buy downtown. They cut up their credit cards and they mailed them back in so that the owners and the managers would know that this was a systematic, decided, action on their part. So they would make mistake about saying, well, they don't want to come downtown because, whatever. No, they cut up their credit cards. It meant that they weren't charging anything else. They weren't coming down. And the thing they did was went to the chief of police in Nashville and told him that they were not going to shop downtown because they are sick and tired of walking through all of that blood on the streets where they've been beating people at the lunch counters and outside on the streets. So even though they did not push forward the whole idea of desegregation, they found a convenient reason not to shop downtown, and that was the blood on the streets, okay? But nevertheless, they cut up their credit cards, so they had no intentions of going back downtown. And then we had what we call, that's the third one, the second one. Then the third one was we waited until Easter of that year in 1960 to then put forth our economic withdrawal, which meant that was a weekend of the year where you had a lot of patronage and you make a lot of money on Easter and Christmas and, that kind of shopping. But no, we withdrew. And the place was like a ghost town, Easter weekend. They suffered a great financial loss. And so they realized that people were not supporting their policies. And therefore, the economic withdrawal, we don't call it boycott in nonviolence, we just call it, withdrawal. Because the concept here is not that you're going to punish other people because you disagree with them, but it means that you're not going to support their position. And economically is one of the ways you can show your non-support. So, in other words, the people say, we're not going to participate in an unjust system and this inequality. So they themselves, if they were paying and buying things downtown and paying for things, that meant that they would be supporting a system that they felt that was unjust. So the first thing people have to do is look at how they themselves participate in promoting unjust systems. So all they did was withdraw their participation in it. So therefore, they demonstrated their discontent with the conditions that existed. That was very helpful. No revolution has ever been successful without winning this active involvement and support or the sympathy of the majority. And so therefore, the whites represented the majority, and there was enough of them to say, no, we won't accept this system any longer. Now, there were some who wanted to be part of the resistance, and they were members of the different black groups and stuff, but they weren't enough. The majority said, no, we're not going to continue to accept this, and I'm not going to support it. So that was the message that got across. So by using this strategy, we were able then to move forward in implementation of other things, like the bus boycott for Montgomery, Alabama. People decided they were not going to participate in continuing to ride the bus as long as they segregated them, okay? So the Freedom Rides came along, and they demonstrated as we went from one state to another, and were not served. In fact, some people were, some of us were met by mobs, like, in Birmingham and Anniston, Alabama, and I was in Montgomery, Alabama, on the Freedom Ride then. And the thing that bothered me is when they attacked the reporters in the media, I said to myself, if they would beat up the white people, which made up the majority of the media, what are they going to do to us? I mean, the media, they were just simply reporting what was happening. But they decided they would smash the cameras on, folks' heads and stuff like that and beat them up, kick them. I saw them beat up white reporters. They beat up the white reporters like that. What was going to happen to us? So, these are the kind of things we faced. The other was, of course, the voter registration drive. I decided that, if we were able to desegregate the lunch counters, the movie theaters in Nashville, 11 nights of demonstrations. And we desegregated 5 movie theaters downtown Nashville. Yeah. And I began to see how this method and this strategy was so effective. It's the one that Martin Luther King used, and we learned from Martin Luther King. And the whole idea of nonviolence, you don't have to be bitter towards other people, even though people are doing unkind things to you, and people are being violent towards you physically. Even with that, you didn't have to reciprocate or retaliate. That we were putting away violence, not only in the physical sense, but violence in terms of our system that was violent against people. So we couldn't try to get rid of violence at the same time participate in the violence. So we had to say, what other way could we respond? And I got to study Mahatma Gandhi, and I got to study our own New Testament and what we learned about love, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you, rather than do what they do to you. So we learned a lot, and we were able to put it into practice, real practice. When you're faced with a mob downtown and on the Freedom Rides, and you're able to survive those things by not retaliating, okay, giving them an excuse to kill you, whatever, or kill others. I embraced that and embodied that and decided that now I'm prepared to make my contribution to life, and also to be able to make these changes that other people would have to, live this way, and that we can show love, which is much more powerful, than hate. And it strengthens you rather than weakens you, and you stay in control of yourself rather than lose yourself in that sense. So after that, I went on to work in Selma, Alabama, and that's the whole story with that. I have a book on it just how the Selma movement got started. And I was led by a higher power in these movements. And I faced some very difficult situations where, for example, in Selma, Alabama, I was attacked and beaten, and I didn't know until a week or so later that it was planned in New Orleans, the same night that Medgar Evers was killed in Mississippi. They had planned to kill 3 of us. The FBI told me that they planned to kill Ben Elton Cox in Louisiana, Medgar Evers in Mississippi, and to kill me in Selma. And I survived that and survived many other situations, even abroad. But what I do basically is teach people Martin Luther King's philosophy, his theory, but also his practical application of nonviolence, strategies. And that's what I devoted my entire life to. The last words I had with Martin Luther King, this is what he wanted to do next. Well, I was in Chicago helping to recruit gang members and teaching them nonviolence, and I actually was able to send them to Selma to be marshals on the Selma March. And there are photos of the marshals, and there was actually members of the Vice Lords gang in West Side Chicago, because I wanted to get them prepared to be marshals in our demonstrations in Chicago. So what better group than the gang members? Because if they weren't playing a specific assigned role in the marches and demonstrations, then left on their own, they would just be part of helping to create violence, which they knew all too well. Okay, they had that experience. But being nonviolent and being marshals on a nonviolent march, they felt much more, empowered. They had the courage. All they needed to have is the nonviolent approach and understand why you don't participate in the violence. Now, when they were out of not involved in the nonviolent movement, they were still gang members. But for some of them, they began to really come around, particularly the leadership. And they began to see that this is applicable not only in social change, direct action demonstrations, but in other parts of their lives and experiences. Yeah. So Martin Luther King was observing me, and I didn't know it. Okay. So when I was completing the Chicago movement, and we're moving on to the anti-war movement, and I was director of the spring mobilization to end the war in Vietnam. And that was another whole experience I had. And I sort of learned about organizing and also dealing with and managing conflict, even within your own group. And the groups that have used to be national groups involved in the direct action campaigns that are not in existence now, it had more to do with the inability to, and unfortunately, were not able to manage the conflict within their own organizations. I have a great love for Martin Luther King and what he contributed, so now I'm, for example, the chairman of the national board of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that Martin Luther King founded, back in the mid-50s, 57 in fact. And it's a skill that I have, and I just quietly try to put it into practice wherever I can see it. But the main thing I'm interested in is training young leaders how to manage a group and how to manage conflict and keep things moving, how to build coalitions. We had a coalition of about 120 organizations in New York when we had the spring mobilization in 1967. April 15th, Martin Luther King spoke at the UN in New York after a big rally in Central Park. we organized that with all the different groups in New York. You know, they all collaborated and worked together on this march. And that was right after Martin Luther King had made the big speech at Riverside Church in New York. So he was on a roll and addressing global issues. Because the final thing I want to say at this point is that we make a mistake when we see a problem in our local community or in our local country or state and assume that that problem is isolated. We have to look at it in a micro way so we can see the relationship between what happens in our country and what happens in other countries. And what happens in other countries also affect us. And I think this is the most important thing, that rather than seeing our problems in an isolated way and trying to work on them when they are affected by a larger, community of people. And that's why Martin Luther King always talked about the beloved community. He was not talking about the United States or a particular section of the United States. He was talking about a global community. That's why he had to go to the mountaintop, okay? So he can look over and be able to see, okay, the relationship between our country and we as a people. We're all human beings. We live on earth together. And like Martin Luther King said, what happens to one directly, indirectly affects all of us, because we are, a community. The best way the United States can play a role in easing that conflict in other countries and what people are suffering and is that, first of all, we have to be ourselves the best example. So we have to work on how we are seen by the rest of the world and people. At the same time, we can't wait until we become perfect, which we will never be perfect, but we have to share those same ideas and concepts and values. And we have to participate with other countries. The key thing is in dealing with other countries is that we must be able to look at, number one, our allies. Because if we're going to do something to make a difference, we got to have the support of other people in the world who agree with us. I mean, even if they don't participate directly, we have their support, okay? The next thing we have to do is look at the allies of the other people who are doing unjust and evil things to their own citizens, okay? And somebody say, well, why are you over there involved? Those are not your citizens of the U.S. Those people are, they have their own country, their own citizenship. No. We are part of each other, and that's why we have to be supportive of human beings, not countries, because it depends on who's running the country and the power there that controls. If people are being treated unjustly and unfairly, okay, and not respected equally as human beings, then it's our responsibility, because we are human beings and we believe in, equality and justice, starting with ourselves, of course. We have a responsibility for people in the rest of the world. So we have to look at other countries that are also allies to those people who are doing the unjust things, because they supply the resources and also the justification and other kind of materials. It's like South Africa. You had a few whites who controlled all those millions of black folks. We say, well, how did they do that? A few Afrikaans. Look how long it took for South Africa to get its liberation. It was in the 90s. Most of the other countries in Africa, you know, it was around in the late 60s, 63, 64, you know, they were getting their liberation, you know, and overthrowing colonialism. What took South Africa so long? Well, they had diamonds, they had gold, and it wasn't a few whites that controlled South Africa. It was about 6 or 7 other countries, including the U.S. Yeah, including some of the other countries like Sweden. Yes, okay. You can't get away with that. Okay, Israel was involved. And so there were about 200 other countries that were supporting the apartheid system. That's why it took so long. And they were having an interest in the gold and diamonds and other minerals because they existed there in South Africa. That's why. Okay? So Mandela, of course, stayed in jail many years, but he was in jail planning how he's going to run the government. So his, you know, his jail and incarceration became a university because there were many other people and leaders in jail with him, and they happened to be together. So they had opportunities to plan how they were going to govern things differently, and they believed that. And so jail was a convenient place for them to be in planning the next government. So our responsibility as a country and as human beings, okay, is to do what we can to make a better world. And as I said, a better people and a better life, because life is so short. When you think about it, the older you get, the shorter it seems. So, but we have to work for the next generation. And we also have to support the leadership of the new generation. And that's how we can help make a difference, that we can give them that support, that guidance, and the benefit of the history. That's why history is so important, because if you don't understand the mistakes of the past, you're bound to repeat them. And if you don't know your history, then your future will be a mystery. When these kind of incidents, like the one you mentioned in Starbucks, happens, the people respond based on fear. They assume that people are not going to be behaving in the best interests of others, and even the law enforcement. It's something that we have to continue to work at. And people feel that they have the advantage if they have the power. Like the policemen, they have unlimited power because they're the only people in our community, in our society, who can execute another person, okay, without any repercussions. If they determine in their mind that that person is dangerous and that person is going to kill somebody or even kill the policeman, if in their judgment, see, they're not behind the bench now, but they're behind the weapon and the ability to execute, they are justified to take the life of another person if they assume that that person has a weapon or either the power to take their lives. And they leave home every morning with the uncertainty as to what they're going to face. Some people go and do a job every day, and they know what their job is, and they can, pretty much predict, what time they're going to get off and what they're going to, deal with, like making a car or something, and they're back home. Policemen, they never know when they're going to be called. Their call could be to save somebody's life, or their call could end up in them losing their lives as well. So with that, what we have to do is do an unknown situation that you get into, because you never know what you're going to be called in, is to be prepared to talk and ask questions. Now, they are also trained, by the way, some groups, to disarm themselves and go into hostile situations and even hostage situations and talk the person out of committing a crime without weapons. Make it very clear, I don't have a weapon. So I can't even shoot you back if you shot me. So they put their lives on the line. But that is a more effective approach than having a shootout. Sometimes you can have a shootout and you kill the person that the hostage who you're trying to save. So my point is the ability to talk, and that's the thing we have to give our officials and also other people, even the staff people in Starbucks, okay? I was in Starbucks just the other day, 2 days ago, and I wanted some coffee. And they didn't have any, something that they didn't have ready or whatever. They actually gave me a free cup of coffee. Okay? This was after that incident took place. But they gave me a free cup of coffee, and I happened to have had a Starbucks credit card, and I bought a package of coffee. But you might say violence is the language of the inarticulate. The ability for people to be able to talk and communicate with each other there's no exception in terms of the effect that could have. Even people who might have evil intent, okay? It's how you're able to respond to them. I give you a perfect example. When I was in Montgomery, Alabama on the Freedom Rides, it was Birmingham, where those of us in Nashville had continued the Freedom Rides, and it started to our continuation in Birmingham after the bus was burned and people were beaten. We came down and we were on the way. But we had to stay in the bus station overnight because no bus driver coming up would want to drive us. But they were afraid of what might happen to the bus, and they would be on the bus. They didn't know these people either, okay? Even though some of them might have been from Alabama. Maybe they knew them all too well, so they didn't. So we were waiting. Every time we'd go to try to get on a bus, the bus driver would jump off the bus and off for the day. So we stayed overnight in the bus station. The Klan, that was the first time I saw the Klan up close, okay, in front of me. They had the hoods thrown backwards, and they were walking around in their robes. And we were up all night, so in the middle of the night, we were sleepy. And this Klan member came and threw some cold water on my face. And I jumped up and I saw the Klan, and I said, "Thank you, thank you." Because I needed to stay awake, with the Klan walking around. But that caused the Klan member to stop throwing water on me because he wasn't there to do me a favor. He was there to humiliate me. But when I thanked him for throwing the water on me, I saw his face like he had made a mistake. So that stopped. So it's how you choose to respond. I could have responded another way, but I chose to respond, okay, in a positive way. And what did I get? I got a positive reaction because he was confused about why I was saying thank you, because that was not his expectation. Okay? So, the way we can decrease the violence that we face in these situations, like Starbucks and other places, is we have to train our staff people to talk. And then they would learn a lot more about situations. It's better if you're able to keep the situation under control and avoid the perpetration of violence and the perpetuation of it. And the people who are prone to do that also have a conscience. And the whole idea in nonviolence is to try to strike the conscience of the other person. And we will learn more about how to handle those situations through exercises and training. And that's one of the things we do. Yes. What's called for today, and is evidenced by what we see happening, like some people say, well, there's a resurgence of those kind of attitudes and those kind of behaviors and that kind of thing, etc. Okay, like as we sit here today, this is a holiday. Okay, Confederate state holiday. All right, so people want to preserve the history and the past. The question is, how do we interpret the history and the past? Do we want to go back and implement that kind of attitude and behavior? Or do we want to recognize that that was the behavior, that's the reality, that was the history, but we've moved on from that. So it's not a matter of experiencing what happened in the past, it's a matter of interpreting. And what do we take away from that? What do we learn from that? What do we do now? Okay. The laws have been changed in many cases, like the Civil Rights Act and the Voter Registration Act, and those acts were put in place in order to correct the problem. The question is, are these problems corrected? And so we have to then re-examine to see to what extent have things changed. And history repeats itself. That's the other thing that we have to recognize, that we go in cycles. And sometimes it's a small cycle, and sometimes it's a large cycle. Like the Reconstruction period was a very large cycle we had to go through. Okay? There was a time when blacks used to be elected officials from the South. Okay? Not just the North, the South. And so that changed. We have to understand why it changed, how it changed, and then how do we make it change again? So as we go forward, we have to see that we must have in place an educational process that even in elementary school on up, we have to help young people understand the negatives that happened. Because if they don't appreciate the negatives, then they will simply implement those, because they have a tendency to either look at things in a very positive way and helpful way. And a lot of people feel that it has to do with a power relationship, that we got to find somebody that we can have power over. I call it, based on one of my professors at Harvard University, childism. Some people feel that they got to treat other people like children, which means that they don't allow them to manage any resources, and that we make decisions for them as well. Because if a child, 5-year-old child, is given a $20 bill for his birthday, what is he supposed to do with a $20 bill? Okay? All right? And they're supposed to give it to their parents. So therefore, even the resources, say for an example that was in Africa, they didn't control that. Okay? Yeah. The people who felt more empowered control that. Here it's the same thing. We have to help people understand that power is to be shared and not based on ethnicity. And it has to be, some people born in a geographical area. No. Or either the gender, for example. Women, don't make as much money as men. Do the same job, okay? And still don't make the same amount of money because it's the gender issue. So we have to re-examine our own behavior and our own thoughts and our own views of what would be a society that would be just and equal, but also loving. We've got to learn to love each other as brothers and sisters, because that's what we are. And regardless of our color of our skin or whatever. And like, for example, I most recently started using the example that if white means that you're more powerful and you're better than others, then you have to turn to the black race, because the whitest people we know are albinos. So if whites are supposed to be better, if that's the conclusion, okay, then can't get any whiter than that, okay. I don't know any white albinos, okay. All the albinos we know are skin color, look, much more pale. So it's an irony in the whole thing. That's the point we're making, and we can overcome that. I feel good because I see, even in Black Lives Matter demonstrations and marches and all, I see a large number of young white people. Yeah. So they've gotten it, all right? Now, our job is to institutionalize it in our educational system. Like, for example, in our businesses, for example, Starbucks, who we mentioned, they've come to the conclusion they've got to stop and then go back and kind of help their workers learn how to deal with the public if they're going to be effective at this. Now, some people might say, I don't matter, whatever. No, it's everybody has to be treated in an equal way. And that's why I go back to saying that while we've changed the laws, we've got to change the hearts of people. And we've got to help interpret things in a way. Because in that situation we just had just the other day with the Waffle House, okay, it happened to be a black man who saved the life of a lot of white people, okay? And that has nothing to do with his understanding that the person was aiming at black folks. No, we don't know. That person has some, mental problems, obviously, because there's no evidence so far that anybody in that Waffle House who he killed, did anything to him. So it was at random, like the other, killings, Parkland in Florida and other places and movie theaters where people were just killed. You only got one life to live, and for someone to just come and arbitrarily, just take the life of your family members, your parents, your siblings and your children, your friends. I think we're too intelligent for that. And I think this is why we've got to pass some laws that restrict people from carrying weapons. Now, we got to understand the purpose of the law that allowed them, Amendment 2, was because we needed to raise armies right away to fight and protect ourselves. Okay? So everybody had to be armed in case we needed them. So that was one of the reasons why they let you have arms. We also had to hunt because that's the only way people could get food. So having rifles, but assault rifles that are not, designed for that kind of thing, are not So we got to re-examine the distribution of those weapons, because over and over again we see how people misuse those weapons and stuff like that. And some of them is based on racial attitudes that folks have. But not all of them. You know, the mass murder we've seen so far, you know, a lot of it has nothing to do with race per se. Okay? But we do have a lot of exorbitant number of police killings of blacks, like the incarceration, that kind of thing. So we need to re-examine how we should approach these situations. Now, one of the things we need to stop doing is putting black targets for target practice. Because if you have target practice and you have a black figure that you shoot at all the time, it becomes easier for you to shoot black. Okay? So that is sort of subliminal in the sense that people are unconscious of that kind of behavior and those kind of assumptions. But as I say, I have hope for the future because I'm seeing large numbers of black and white young people stepping forward. And they're intelligent, and I believe if they got the training and they got the exposure and the education that's needed, they can be an example for the rest of the world.